David White. I'm recovered from, wow, a myriad of things. Drug dealer, womanizer, very violent individual, and whatever we'll end up revealing through your questioning.
All right. So can you give us some background on you, like your childhood, how it led up to you, to whatever lifestyles that you were in, and, how it makes sense to who you are today?
Wow. That's a tricky question because it's still starting to make sense to me now. But my childhood, I grew up in an area in Tampa known as College Hill. It was, a lot of people say one of the worst ghetto areas, project areas in Tampa at the time. And that's where I grew up at, single family home. My mom, she tried the love life by dating. And that's what actually led to, I think, one of the most detrimental parts of my childhood. Because even before then, I grew up, since the second grade, I was in the gifted program. So the way I was raised and the way I ended up being were two different ways. Because I was raised leaning on my intellect to change my environmental situation and the way we grew up. It's weird because even when I look at it myself and I have to reevaluate it, the way my life started out for me and the way life ended up, it didn't make sense in the beginning. I grew up with trying to be like Thurgood Marshall as a kid growing up in the projects and thinking I'll be the first black president and never thinking I'll end up selling drugs, robbing, or being a womanizer. Those were things that were never on my mind. But needless to say, around the age of 14, 15, that's when my mom got murdered. And with my mom being murdered, I learned to survive. And this when life changed. That's when I changed. And my concept of life changed, so I became a totally different individual.
All right, so what mentality would you say still stuck with you, even though, like you mentioned, trying to be like Thurgood Marshall in the hood and thinking you would be the first black president? Like, what part of that is still with you today? And how did that translate? We'll get into, the 14, 15.
Yeah.
But how did that translate to who you are today?
I think it's recently been reestablished and recognized since I've come into an atmosphere that's conducive for it. Like now that I'm in the Christian faith, now that I'm in the church and around people that are concerned about people, I now have room and passion to help again, to be more than just what I need to be for myself. But I didn't believe no part of it transferred with me through that lifestyle at first. Because the person that I was, I dimmed it in order to survive the darkness that I was living in. So those hopes, those dreams, those aspirations, I thought they were totally killed, murdered, and diminished. But so only in recent times that my heart is more open to ministry, am I open to things that were important to me before this.
If you can you give us a snapshot from those teen years, like from the 14 to, honestly, maybe into your 20s. Like, who was David White during that time period?
I was a God hater. The state labeled me properly. I remember I used to be offended when I made it to prison by the time I was 18. The prison actually saved my life, but they labeled me a threat to society at 18 years old, and they were trying to ban me from Hillsborough County, but rightfully so, because when my mom got murdered, they tried to put me in foster care and I ran, so I was 14, 15 years old on the street. And I started to just have a place to stay. I literally was selling myself. I was sleeping with older women so I have a roof over my head, and the older women would cook for me so I didn't have to worry about food. But I also started robbing to make sure I could provide for myself, plus I had a child. In turn, I was robbing so much, a little stick-up kid, an older drug dealer, slowed me down and taught me how to sell drugs to prevent me from robbing so much. And the weird thing about that in the neighborhood, he felt like he was doing me a better deed because I lived longer selling drugs than I would by robbing people, because it was known that I was a shooter. So, man, I was a wicked young dude. I was godless, and I was heartless, and a lot of things it was all emotions.
You were saying how you were godless, things like that. What I want to do in these, quick 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes of this this part of the interview, I wanted to really highlight like how did you become open to who you became, you know, in your teens. And because I believe it's something there that a lot of people who know you don't know.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Your childhood really played a big part in the things that we know, you know, like
Yes.
the most one and, you know, all,
Yes.
all the hot topics. You know, I think I want to touch on some of the, like, what kind of friends did you have when you was like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, it was isolated then, but I can tell you, my childhood was fashioned by. I found out later. I didn't know then. Like me and I never liked it, my mom, even before she was murdered. But let me understand, she was an excellent provider for the kids and for us in the house. I actually used to think I was adopted because it was 9 of us. But the way my mom handled me, I thought I was an adopted child. I found out later what the reasons were, and I'm finna lead up to you and tell you. So I always knew, she always said by the time I turned 14 or 15, she was gonna put me out of the house. Regardless of what, I could get a whooping for, I was a little more quicker than my brother when it came to books and stuff like that. So if I helped my older brother, he got frustrated, he cried, I got a whooping, say I was making him feel bad. If my teacher or someone complimented me on my hair, I used to have long hair, long braids. If they say, oh, he's a cute young man, I smiled, I got a whooping. She was trying to keep me humble because she thought I was gonna be like my dad. I never knew what she was talking about. So stuff like that. And the mistreatment, it was always a contradiction on how I was handling and the other kids were handling it. But I just literally, in my mind, I'd say I must be an adopted child. Like, that's what the justification was. So when she get murdered, the night she got murdered, I was the one that intervened in the argument they were having. And that night she told me to get out of her house because I argued with a man. And literally I walked off. I wasn't gone 5 or 10 minutes, and people were calling my kid's mom house. I went to my kid's mom house, I had a child. Say, tell David someone just got shot at the house. So I go back to the house, but this is when my world changed. I'm hoping as I ride my bicycle back there that my mom don't kill this dude. The furthest thing from my mind is that he don't kill my mom. So the fact that now I'll never get the answer or the love that I was waiting on was over, the idea of who God was to me was over. And I declared that night, if it's a God in heaven, you better stop me. I'm gonna hurt all these people. And I just, you know, my heart was darkened for decades after that, but that was the sum of it. That's what brought this rage forth that no one ever experienced before my mom got killed. And nothing could contain or satisfy this rage. But in later times, as I'm older now, about 5 years ago, I found out the truth of the matter wasn't that I was adopted, but my family let me know that I was a child of rape. So I looked just like my dad, and every time when I'm in her face smiling, she was reminded of the fact that she was forced to marry a man that violated her. Now, the man wasn't in a home with us, but the child that looked just like him was. So my mom's capacity was limited. She loved me the best she can because she still provided a roof over my head long as she was there. She still fed me long as she was there. So me being mature now and understanding more than what I did then, I see that it was love all along, but it was love all along. I thought she never loved me.
Have you been able to heal from the hurt that you did experience as a child, even though you didn't understand it?
It's all being processed. It's still a continual. Mm-hmm. It's continual. Like even when you've concluded that forgiveness is there, I was loved. The closure part is steady being fulfilled. The closer I get to God and the more I comprehend my worth, my healing is happening as I go. Like at one stage, I thought I was where I needed to be 2 years ago. Then I realized that I was emotionally dead. I was emotionally immature. And I started dealing with emotions when I started dating. So now I ran across parts of me that I didn't even realize were undealt with. So it started unraveling again. Then I started a new healing process. So I found that it came in it comes in layers, but totally progressive. Totally progressive.
how have you been able to get over the labels that people have put on you? So like a threat to society, or you won't be this, you won't be. How have you gotten through those labels?
I'm anointed to be a contradiction. Like, for when people hear me speak with Ebonics, if they're not careful, they'll think that it denotes a level of intelligence with it, which it doesn't. If they judge me by a mouthful of goals, they wouldn't realize that they're seeing my influences in the past, not where I am now. So I look forward to God getting glory out of my life and me being a contradiction to everything that someone assumes out of me. So it motivates me in a weird way. Like, it motivates me to be more than what I look like, more than what you called me, more than what you say I was able to do.
Mm-hmm.
What's beautiful is, like, through testimonies like yours, I kind of like see that God had a plan for you from the jump.
Yeah.
But the enemy had schemes that he was gonna try to put you through, and through everything that you've seen, heard, been around, and done, I think that God's original intent, which was you being in the gifted programs and you being like Thurgood Marshall. If we be real, bro, you are like Thurgood Marshall. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for years, and I would say that. I mean, when it comes to your wisdom, when it comes to you being able to offer a good word, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yes,
that's very judge-like.
Yes,
that's
sir.
like you're somebody that we as younger people, older people can consistently come to.
Yes, sir.
You know, for wisdom, for advice. And I just want to ask, through all of that, right, and leading up to, you know, the labels and things like that, how would you say you became open to receive from God again?
Actually, I have, yes. So you went,
add on to that question.
Yes. How did you become open to God? But because you went from a God hater, we stopped at that.
Yes.
That was the perfect segue. We stopped at the moment where your whole world changed, and you said, "Okay, God, if you are real, then I'm going to hurt all these people." What was the other defining moment that you said, "Okay, God, I'm not going to hurt all these people, but I'm gonna see about who you are"?
Yes.
What was that moment?
Literally, it was a divine encounter, and when I break it down, you're gonna see. I'll show you the part where I encountered God, and then when I encountered the strength to move forward towards changing God for myself. But like I say, at 18, when I was in prison, I found myself in prison at 18. I wasn't an angel. I was innocent of the charges I went to prison for, but I wasn't innocent. The cops did what was necessary to get me off the streets. They planted some drugs on me. I was wanted for worse. I was wanted for worse, and I've done worse. But while I was in prison, I made sure that when I was headed to prison, I didn't want jailhouse religion. I didn't want to know nothing about God. As a matter of fact, for years I hadn't been being mentored and molded by members of the Black Panther Party, members of the Nation of Islam, Hebrew Israelites. So you gotta realize that with all the knowledge I was encountering and what the idea of God was from this school of thought, I still knew it wasn't per se the God of the universe, this God of love, because I hated him. But everything else that I did had a appearance of righteousness and intelligence, but it wasn't related to holiness, you know, so I knew that it wasn't the same. Needless to say, in prison, I started encountering, I was sneaking in, I was trying to destroy the Bible. I was trying to prove that the Bible was a book of falsehood and that Christianity was a white man's religion. So as I tried to dissect it, I ran into contradictions that caused me to realize that a lot that I was taught to battle Christians with was actually lies. I found the Christian church was established in Ethiopia since AD 4. The history, I went to running into stuff that says, hold on, there's something more valid about this book and this religion than what I was taught. So I end up reading, I'm going to skip a lot, but I end up reading the story of Gideon in the Bible. I'm sitting in prison, I'm sitting on a bunk, is what was the bunk beds. And there were window panes. I seen that Gideon questioned God to find out his identity and purpose. And now I'm like, well, if this is so much of this going on and it's a real God, because I start feeling different as I'm reading this book, the book changing me. As I'm reading the book, I'm actually changing and I'm not even trying to adapt to this book. And I say, if it's a God for real, I put a test before God. There were window panes, and I test God in a weird way, like a child would. I'm like, if God is real, send a bird by to touch this window pane. It's raining outside, we're sitting on Street the Movement. And when I called out a square for God to send a bird by, amazingly, a bird touched that square. But I'm an intellectual, and this don't make sense. That was just coincidental. So, needless to say, I chose numerous other squares for the next hour and a half. And every square I chose, telling God to prove yourself to me. I'm realizing that the God I've been hating is a God that's real. And everything I've been doing is in violation of this God. So he's played tic-tac-toe with me to prove that you are God. You have a purpose for my life, and I've been in error. And the reality hit me at an awkward time like that. So all I knew at the time was, I said, God, I'll never shoot nobody else. Or I committed those major things and repented of those major things because I didn't have faith to live for God. I just knew what I couldn't do no more, knowing that God was real. Fast forward, my life still wasn't transitioned because I had knowledge of God from prison, but I didn't have faith in God to sustain myself when I got out of prison. And I didn't have trust in God to believe that he was going to work it out. So I ended up in a cycle to where I'm still hearing God's voice while I'm living a wicked life, but God is still directing me, but I won't submit to God, but I'll speak enough for God to feel satisfied with receiving my voice. What brought me to the point to live it, a guy who was in prison with me, after I was out of prison like 10 years, said he met a pastor that loved his wife and loved his people. And he said it was right down the street. I was hustling about 3 blocks from here. I used to sneak in and watch. The pastor who we know now is Apostle Mark Jones. I used to watch the way he engaged the people and engaged his wife. And his story, I could relate to his story. So what God did was show me that a man who's lived a certain way could actually walk a life that was pleasing to him. And he could live beyond what I thought all preachers were, with crooked, whoremongers, and slick dudes. And I got closer to him, and his lifestyle now made me face that if he could do what you can. And that's when God was able to start speaking to me while I eased out the streets, but in the short version.
So, if he could do it, then you can do it.
That's what that said to me.
What ways have you seen what examples, okay, you said, like with his wife and with how he was living, he could translate it over. What ways have you seen yourself change, like, actively from who you used to be? Like,
wow. Everything, the way I see life, the way I perceive life, the way I handle situations. Like, since I fell in love with God, I've been trying in ways the way outside of me knowing Christ, it ain't no way in heaven or hell that nobody would have got away with what they've been doing to me. But I'm a builder of people now. I am a builder of people. I always was a leader per se, but I was teaching destruction. I told them everything that we knew in the streets and that reality to be what it is. But everything about me has changed. I don't recognize me. I don't recognize the way I think and perceive anymore. Everything is new. The way I handle relationships, the way it's so broad, I'll take up the whole 27 minutes talking about the change, because everything about me has changed. Everything. I deal with this daily. I wake up in the morning and just look like, God, you've done so much, and yet there's so much to do. I wouldn't know how to answer that question in the short version for you, honestly.
I got a question.
Talk to me.
So the situation can be, based on a person going through a situation, you could take one or two perspectives.
Yes, sir.
So this new man that God is bringing you into, you could say, A, God is repaying me. I'm going through, hell, trying to, live right, and God is repaying me. Or you could say that God is shaping me into who he wanted me to be from the jump.
Yeah.
Right. One thing that God told me a long time ago was, when I first started walking with him, was, I built somebody that he never meant to exist.
Yeah.
So now he got to undo all this and rebuild.
Yeah.
So the question that I have for you is, how have you stayed focused and zoomed in, if you will, on which perspective you're gonna keep? Because our perspective want to change sometimes.
Yeah,
So
I understand what you're saying. I'm gonna tell you, I've always guarded and realized that God isn't a God that repays me. The things that I did automatically do because of principles, reaping and sowing. So for clarity, I never misunderstood God, that God is paying me back for what I did. But yet, in a weird way, I used to believe that I brought it in my life, which was error also. But the fashioning as God brings us forth, I realized that when situations do happen, regardless of what it was all meant to build me. It was definitely all meant to build me. But God's voice keeps me balanced out. It's nothing that I'm good enough or sharp enough to do emotionally to stay focused on the situation to say that this is God working. Without the voice of God guiding me through my struggles, I will lose it, because I'm still human. My emotions will take over, my intellect will take over, my history will take over. So God guides me, literally speaks to me in the middle of struggles even before they erupt. And he guides me through it. He tells me what he's after. But he don't alleviate the storm. I still have to walk through. He tells me what he's after. And now here's the hard part for me. I have to choose to remain in a posture that's pure before him as it's going on.
I have a good question for you. In your change, right? You are a person, you came from the streets, so you know the struggles of people who have lived kind of hard lives, right? Like their relationships with God. Like a lot of people you see, you know, they turn to drugs, or they now something that I've been seeing lately is like a lot of people in the hood have turned to like African religions and you know, different things like that. But they see you know, they talk to their ancestors, they get answers, quote unquote. Manifestation. Like, how can you, as somebody who understands them, lead them to the true God?
Listen, the greatest influence towards the people that I can relate to and people that grew up with me has not been us comparing notes on what God has revealed and what their religion has been revealed, but it's really been a changed life. In the end, there's guys that I love like brothers who, they are priests. They're priests. They have high positions in other religions and stuff like that. But in the end, it's that sustainability that God and the Holy Ghost bring. They ask me questions when crisis hits them. How do I remain focused? How do I remain steadfast? How do I stay out the street? And all this attests to a supernatural change. What happened with me is it's more than just the manifestations on the outward from spiritual influences. God has changed the inner man. And when it comes to Jesus Christ, and you know, not nobody's religion, but you can have who you perceive to be God. But one thing about having Jesus Christ in a pure form, he changes the inner man. So that everything else that's on the outside is the result of what he's done on the inside of me. And that's what makes the biggest difference in the relationships I have with people that name other gods. They name other gods, but they consistently come to me as a priest of truth, a priest in between what they believe to be God and what truth is. So there's something that they're lacking, there's something that they're missing. But I think that coming from where we came from and seeing the church as it is today, they could relate more to it because you deal with what you call black thought, black identity. And a lot of times you don't find that in Christendom, because when you talk black, they think you're talking racism. So that's like taboo. So they feel more comfortable talking about something that they can relate to with just a title of black on it. And they identify with it. It identifies with their struggle. But their inner man is steady suffering.
That's something that I want to build on as well. So you mentioned like nationally renowned like black organizations. Like you got the Black Islamic Party, you know what I'm saying? You got the Hebrew Israelites, you got the Black Panther Party. That's what I was trying to say first.
Yes, sir.
How do you, I mean, because you still black.
Yes, sir.
So, like,
born that way and got extra tones.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, beautiful black. And one thing that I want to ask you, man, is being a black intellectual, right? How would you describe to someone who believes that Christians shouldn't necessarily be intellectual, or we shouldn't be on our knowledge like that? How would you represent yourself in that way? Like if somebody was like, man, okay, people think that Christianity it teaches people to be docile. people believe that the Bible teaches that, you know, we just go through life and God handles everything, like we have nothing to do. So of course it seems weak, right? Like how do you speak to a person who doesn't understand that God is a God of wrath and love?
Yes. Well, I think I was one of those people. I used to believe meek was weak. And I'm a firm believer now that whatever, if it's not properly defined, it can't be properly applied. So a lot of times we're living by what we perceive to know about a religion or a people, and even a lot of people that profess Christianity don't fully comprehend what these postures mean. But by conviction, it's meant for me to be educated, for me to be socially aware, for me to be what I am in the community, because this is my call and my convictions. For someone else, I don't hold them to the same state. I don't feel like I'm missing something or lacking anything for me to be educated in these spheres or for me to be comfortable dialoguing with them. I got Muslim friends. I got friends that I still talk to, and we hug each other and love each other for real. I got brothers that are of other faiths, and that's where I'm called to. That's what I'm equipped for. So personally, I think people have to find out what God has called them to, study scripture, understand the word, and also the words that the scriptures are to come around. Know what is of God and what's not of God. That's the defining line.
How has being a prophet really fit into your story? And how has it, how has that actual calling, because you didn't get that when you got saved.
Sure did.
Right, so wrapping it up, how does your gifting as a prophet speak to what you've seen in your life? And how has that assisted you in your recovery?
I got you to add to what you're
Yes,
going
I'm going to add this. How has, like sometimes people see a caller.
Yes.
How has somebody who is very unrefined in a way,
yes,
how has that affected?
By the church standard.
Right.
But very refined.
Very refined,
yes.
but
I'm going to say it, very refined in character.
Yes.
A very approachable person.
right, but can't be held in a box.
yes.
How does something that can sometimes feel like prophets have to do this and you have to speak this way, how has that not affected, but how has that influenced you possibly in a way?
I think both ways that you put it actually affected and influenced are actually both well accepted on it. I'm gonna go with Ardell first, like with the gift. You gotta remember, my understanding of the office and the gift came in recent times. But the operation of the office had always been there. I just thought it was me. I didn't know who I was when I was in the street. So even then, God was speaking to me. God would warn me ahead of time, give me instructions, but I just thought I was a sharp dude. I was an anomaly. So pride was attached to the gift. I wasn't humble with the gift. I misused the gift. Women could talk to me a little bit, and I knew more about what they desired and wanted, so I knew how to position myself in their lives. And me not knowing what the prophetic was, me not knowing who a prophet was, who I was in the equation of God, I had no responsibility, no conviction, no honor for the gift. And it misled me. The devil had total control of my gift then. So I was no better than a warlock or a psychic or someone else. I was receiving benefits from my gift, and God wasn't receiving the glory. But now that I know who I am and I've agreed with the calling of God, we're at this new place. And dealing with the way it's affected me having a collar. The collar per se, I accepted it as a yoke. I accepted it as to not be all I wanted to be, because I could be sort of audacious and flamboyant in me being who I am. So the collar brought me to a controlled place for a controlled environment.
You don't have any unchecked
in the organized church, yes. So me knowing that I'm called as a prophet without the collar, for me the collar signified a way that I will now humble myself to the very organization, or we're not talking about the collective body, the spiritual. We're talking about the idea that I'm submitted now in an organized fashion in the church, and I'll abide by rules. It stopped me from being a renegade, stopped me from being free at the point that I thought I needed to be in order to flow on my gifts. So it affected me, and it in a lot of ways, but it benefited me. It definitely benefited me. A lot of people, we'll deal with some of the other things later, but it affected, but it was all beneficial. Yes.
All right, so Closing remarks for strong young black men that don't know what to do with themselves in today's systems, who are built to thrive in systems that aren't yet created. Like,
Yes,
what would you say to them?
I would say reach out to me or find someone that's doing what you desire to do outside the normality of where you've been raised. In order to truly change what you believe you need change in, you have to find outside influences that bring something into your life, principles, results of these decisions and things that you've never seen. So you have to be willing to step outside the box. And stepping outside the box means stepping outside the color lines at times, because your greatest mentor might not look nothing like you, but have the principles that's necessary to change you.
And I guess just, wrapping up this episode, what's one thing that you can tell people in relation to your relationship with God? How can they form an authentic, what's one practical way that they can form an authentic relationship with God to help them change that inner man?
Pursue God brand new. Like, when the Bible says have faith of a child, I realize that being an intellectual, coming into the faith of Christianity, you tend to want to understand everything and you want it to make sense before you totally commit. And the way I found God was to forget what I thought I knew and not commit to what I already done researched and say, God, revealed to me who you are and who I am to you. So it takes a posture of submission and a posture that's open to newness and awareness of who God is.
Man, I'm so happy to be here.
What's
Man, I thank God for Jesus. And he surely is on time.
Oh, listen. I don't know what to say for y'all. What you want me to say?
You just say it like I'm,
Don't tell him what to say.
let's see. What makes you happy? What makes you smile?
Helping people.
Okay, all right.
Building people.